Hey guys, this isn't a welcome back to 1.8.9. This is a little vlogisode because I wanted to talk to you guys about what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. Because I know, as much as I tell you to use Twitter, some of you don't. A lot of you don't, I don't think. I'm not telling you to use Twitter per se, I'm telling you to check my account every so often because that's where my day-to-day updates come in. Anyway, in saying that, you don't need an account to check what I've been saying. All you have to do is go to Twitter and look for @RoseSpikes. That's the @ symbol and then RoSSPikes, Rose Spikes, and I'll put that down in the description as well. So what's been going on? Right. So the last couple of weeks, you'll notice that the video content has not been as stable, especially this week. This week has been pretty much a total write-off so far. That's because I've been having hardware troubles with the computer. The problem is that my old motherboard on my computer, which I'll probably put something up in edit here to show you what kind of motherboard it is. It's an old, cheap, kind of like low-cost version of what was available at the time that I got it. And it's an Ivy Bridge motherboard. And over the years, since it's been about 4 years old now, I think, it has served me well, but very recently, it has had the USB controller on the motherboard start to fail. And it started to fail to the point where I could only have about 2 things plugged in at once. Both front slots, back slots, didn't really matter where anything was plugged in. I could only really have 2 things plugged in at once. So that was either, my keyboard and my mouse and my microphone, my keyboard and my microphone, So I could only have 2 of those things, and I needed all 3. That's how this works. So what I have done is, thanks to the amazing support of my Patreons, I've dug deep into the savings, and I have replaced the motherboard. This video is coming to you from the computer as it's been reassembled. It is now a Asus Z170-AR motherboard, and it's also using that's a Skylake motherboard, which has meant that I've also had to shell out and get a new CPU, because the thing that I thought was that, well, I could just replace the Ivy Bridge motherboard that I had, because the CPU, for all intents and purposes, was still okay. But I also felt that if I shelled out the money for a new Ivy Bridge motherboard, it would be kind of shooting myself in the foot for future-proofing reasons. So we've gone the way of replacing the CPU as well. So now we have a Skylake motherboard and a Skylake CPU in this machine. The CPU that I got was a 6600 or 6600K i5, and I think that's 3.5 gigahertz clock speed, which is exactly the same, essentially, as the Ivy Bridge that I had before. The good thing about all this is that in the future it could be upgraded, it could be downgraded, whatever, because Skylake is the most recent one, so we have plenty of time to fool around with the hardware. And plenty of time in the tech world, of course, is not very long. It's a couple of years maybe, but that's enough to serve us for our purposes. The next thing I want to talk about, so that explains, hopefully, why I haven't been producing any videos. Can't really produce any videos when my only options are either my mouse and my mic, or my keyboard and my mic. I suppose I could have done a couple of silent episodes, but I don't think that would have been good enough. I didn't want to put that kind of content up on my my channel, having silent episodes. Next thing I wanted to talk about was, because at the time that this problem happened, there were 2 scenarios for fixing it. either we replace the motherboard and the CPU and get a working USB controller up and running, which means that I can have multiple USB devices plugged in at a time and not have to worry, or replace the microphone with a analog microphone which does not use USB to provide its power or its input, right? So that the idea was that I would only then need two things plugged into the motherboard anyway. The problem with that, of course, is I don't know how long the motherboard was going to last. It could go down to one USB very soon and then no USBs at all, and then you can't actually use the computer whatsoever. So, but at that time I was thinking about, a solution to the problem would be just to get a proper analog condenser microphone. Because as you guys know, it needs to happen anyway. That is something that needs to happen, because as you guys know, there's been episodes since I got the condenser microphone where there's been a horrible buzz on it. And that horrible buzz is to do with the fact that USB condenser microphones are entry level, and there's cut costs in doing that for the companies that produce them. And it's a very common thing to have that sort of point of failure in these microphones. So it needed to be replaced with something better anyway. So when I say I've dug deep into the savings, I really have. The channel will now have at its disposal a Yamaha MGO6X mixing board. I was going to get an MGO6 full stop, but they haven't produced any, or New Zealand didn't have any available for shipping. A couple of places said they did, but they both called me back and said, hey, we don't have this. So we're getting an X, MGO6X. That's kind of like a mid-range entry-level mixing board. Then I've also replaced the microphone. You are still hearing the USB microphone right now because not all the parts have come. The only thing that I have right now is my new microphone, and I can't use that because it's an XLR connection. I don't have the rest of the equipment here to plug it in. So we're still using the USB microphone right now. So speaking of microphone, the microphone I got is a Blue Spark. That is, the company is Blue, and the model is Spark. So it's a pretty awesome microphone. I got it in the mail the other day. It is absolutely beautiful. Although its look isn't what's important, its sound is. And I did quite a few reviews. I watched quite a few reviews, and it appears to be a absolutely fantastic microphone. So at least for its price point. So I'm excited to get that up and running, especially with the mixing board and stuff. The other thing that I got, I've had it for a while actually. I've had it long before the channel was actually up and running. I've just never bothered to set it up properly. Is I have a specialist sound card. It's a Zonar Essence STX from Asus. That is a pretty awesome sound card. So how things are going to work is the microphone's going to be plugged into the mixing board. The mixing board is then going to be plugged into the sound card. And hopefully we're going to have fantastic sound quality with none of the buzz or anything that we've been having before. Total upgrade to the hardware this channel has. Obviously, I personally benefit from these upgrades, and that's why I think it's important for me to vlog that these things have happened. But I also think it's important that you guys know that I am using the funds appropriately for the channel. So I have fixed the motherboard. The channel will be back on schedule as usual next week. Even if the new microphone's not ready to use, we'll keep using this USB condenser. And everything should be hunky-dory. So that is the end of the news, I guess. Something I wanted to explain, though, is a lot of you probably don't actually know why the USB condenser microphones are not such a good choice, and I feel like I really did a dumb thing when I got a USB condenser microphone in the beginning. Sure, it has served the channel well so far, but it has its problems, and it's very, very frustrating. I have to do a lot of audio testing before I start any of these recordings to make sure that the connection is going to stay solid throughout the whole thing, and I have to be very careful not to jiggle anything or bump the microphone, because anything could set it off. So the thing that is important to note here is that when it comes to a USB condenser, they're entry level for a reason. The intention really was to avoid, I guess, these brands. This is all stuff that I've been told and read about. So if I get any of this wrong, please feel free to type down the bottom, and I will comment on it so people can see those comments better. But the intention was for these microphone companies to provide a simple solution to a better microphone quality setup for people who are just starting their home studios or things like that, which, it is very important for me to have that kind of access to something simple, but I also feel like it should just be skipped over from the beginning. I feel like it's worth the extra $50 to $100 to get a better setup than go cheap, like getting a USB condenser. The reason why USB condensers are bad is because the way that a condenser works is it's an analog signal. My voice is an analog signal, and the capacitor that picks up that voice vibration is an analog signal. That analog signal needs to be turned into a digital signal. Now, in order to do that in a USB condenser microphone, within the USB condenser microphone itself is what's called a analog to digital converter, or ADC. The ADCs in these microphones are incredibly cheap, because a professional level ADC starts at about $300 plus. And the microphone that I have now is certainly not $300. So the quality of the ADC in it is substandard. It's okay though, because it does its job. Clearly, the voice quality is not so bad as to worry about. The reason why that's important to note though is because the companies, when they're putting together these USB condenser microphones, need to cut costs somewhere to make room for the cost of the ADC in the microphone. Where they make the cut cost is usually in the connections within the microphone. Those connections are usually substandard in order to keep the price point low. A USB condenser microphone would be a fantastic piece of technology if it used premium parts. But then if it used premium parts, you'd be looking at a $500 to $600 microphone at its lowest point. I'm talking in USD, by the way. So in order to keep the cost below $300, this microphone, I think, was 200 and some New Zealand dollars, 215 New Zealand dollars, I think, which is really good. Sounds like a lot, but New Zealand dollar isn't very strong. The connections from the actual microphone itself are terrible, and if I bump this or shake this or anything, it will start the buzzing that you guys have heard in previous episodes before. And it's something that I can't easily see, even if I'm looking at the waveform. So I only really find out in editing, and then it's kind of too late. So that's kind of why USB condensers are not a good idea. If you shell out the extra $100 or even $50 in some cases and get yourself a really cheap mixing board — I have not gone for a cheap mixing board, but even cheap cheap mixing boards are better than the USB condenser setup. Get yourself, if this is something that you're interested in, get yourself an analog microphone with an XLR connection and a cheap mixing board to start off with. You can always replace the mixing board with something better. Why I say mixing board is because there's also the argument that there are analog to digital converters that are cheaper that you can get for USB power, but the problem with them is they're a USB connection, and I personally don't think that's a good idea. I prefer the sound coming through a sound input, not through a USB input. Personal preference, but I just feel like that's the better quality option. Anyway, so that's why I'm talking about mixing boards and not the cheaper versions of ADCs. Also, mixing boards come with the ability to mix, right? That's what they do. They have the knobs and dials on them that let you change the quality or pitch or whatever, or volume of whatever's coming through the microphone. Before it gets to the editing suite, before it even gets to your recording software. That stuff is all, pre-mixed stuff. And they have an ADC. Mixing boards have ADCs. That's where the ADC is in a analog setup. It goes microphone, which is an analog signal, all the way to your mixing board, and your mixing board is then the one that converts that signal into a digital signal and passes it down the like a 3.5 audio connection. So, yeah. That's where I stand. If this is something that you're looking into, because of the problems that I have had with this USB condenser microphone, highly suggest going for a analog microphone to a mixing board to your computer. You don't even need the sound card interface that I have. The only reason that I'm going to use my sound card is because the sound card can isolate the sound and make sure that it is properly processed going in through a 3.5. You don't need all that. You don't need the sound card. It's just overkill. I'm using it because I have it. I've had it for a long time, so I may as well use it. So yeah, that's where things stand on the channel. That's where things stand on my opinion of USB and microphones. So thank you all for listening, and I hope this has been informative as to why the last 2 weeks have been a bit rocky and why my choice of going for an analog microphone is a thing. But you all have a wonderful day, and thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.